Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Histories of Horror. It is officially 2026, and we are 11 days into the new year. So, we hope that you guys had a wonderful holiday break. And I know that we both had very full schedules and did our best to enjoy our own. But tonight, we are tackling a theory that is as ambitious as it is terrifying. We are stepping out of the local woods and onto the iron veins of the American landscape at the turn of the 20th century. We're talking about a time when the railroad wasn't just a way to travel, it was the lifeblood of the country. But for dozens of families, it was the delivery system for a nightmare.
Most true crime fans know the big names Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. But what if I told you the most prolific serial killer in American history isn't even in the textbooks? What if I told you there was a man who likely killed more than 100 people between 1898 and 1912, and he did it without ever being caught, simply by hopping on and off freight trains?
This is the man from the train theory, popularized by the legendary Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James. They didn't find this killer through DNA or fingerprints, they found him through data. They looked at a decade of unsolved axe murders across the US and realized they weren't isolated incidents. They were the work of a single traveling monster.
Think about the logistics of that era, Si. No centralized police, no fingerprint database. If you committed a crime in a small town in Kansas and hopped a freight train, you were effectively a ghost by sunrise. The local sheriff would look at the local town drunk or a suspicious neighbor, never realizing the killer was already 2 states away, eyeballing his next target near a different rail yard.
To understand this killer, we have to look at the signature. This wasn't a man who brought a weapon with him. He was a minimalist. He would hop off a train in a rural town, usually at night. He'd walk the tracks until he found a house that sit just a two bit far from the neighbors, usually a house with a wood pile in the back.
And that's the first chilling detail. He used the family's own axe. He didn't want the risk of being caught with a weapon, so he used yours. But he didn't use it the way you'd expect. In almost every case linked to the man from the train, the victims weren't killed with a blade. They were crushed with the pole, the blunt, heavy back of the axe head.
It's a specific kind of violence. It's heavy, it's mechanical, and it's quiet. He didn't want the swish of a blade, he wanted the weight of a hammer. He would enter through an unlocked door, he would move through the house while the family slept. He was efficient. In many cases, the victims never even woke up.
But it's what he did after the murders that really sets this theory apart. Most killers flee the scene as fast as possible. This man lingered. He has rituals. He would take the bed sheets or clothing from the house and cover the faces of the people he had just killed. He would cover the mirrors. He would even take towels or clothes and pin them over the windows to make sure no one could see in from the outside.
Why the mirrors? Some think it was superstition, preventing the dead from seeing their own ghosts. Others think it was psychological. He couldn't stand the sight of his own reflection in the house of the dead. Whatever the reason, he spent hours in these houses. In some cases, he even ate a meal or washed his hands in a bowl on the kitchen table before heading back to the tracks.
The most famous stop on this trail of blood is, of course, Villisca, Iowa, June 10, 1912. The Moore family and two young guests, the Stillinger sisters. 8 people in total, including 6 children. The house was just blocks from the train tracks. The killer entered in the dead of night, and 8 people left bludgeoned in their beds.
Villisca is the case that finally broke the silence. The brutality was so extreme that it made national headlines, but even then, the authorities were looking for a local face. They put a traveling preacher on trial. They accused a local businessman. They tore the community apart, looking for a motive, not realizing the motive was simply the act itself. The man from the train didn't steal money, he didn't steal jewelry. He left valuables sitting right on the dresser.
Bill James argues that Villisca was the beginning of the end for the killer's American run. The heat was too much. But where did he come from? James traces the origin back to 1898 in Massachusetts to a man named Paul Mueller.
Paul Mueller was a German immigrant, a farmhand who worked for the Newton family. He had a dispute with them, and shortly after, the family was found slaughtered. Mueller disappeared. For the next 14 years, a man fitting his description, a thick set German with a peculiar gait, was spotted near various crime scenes across the country.
We're talking about Colorado Springs, where the Burnham family was killed in 1911. We're talking about Monmouth, Illinois. We're talking about Paola, Kansas. And in every instance, the house was near the tracks. In every instance, the axe was found from the property. In every instance, the windows were covered.
It's the sheer scale of the injustice that gets to me, AL, because the people couldn't conceive of a serial killer moving by rail. They arrested the wrong people. In several cases, innocent men were sent to prison. In the South, the situation was even more dire. At least 7 black men were lynched for the murders that Bill James is almost certain were committed by Paul Mueller.
He was a parasite of the system. He knew that if he moved fast enough and far enough, the lack of communication between the towns would protect him. He was a stranger that every mother warned their children about, but he was real. He was sitting in the boxcars listening to the rhythm of the rails, planning his next stop.
Let's start at the beginning. 1898, West Brookfield, Massachusetts. The night the Newton family met the man who would become a ghost. The Newton case is a crucial one because it gives us a face. Mueller wasn't a shadow yet. He was a disgruntled employee. When the police arrived at the Newton farm, they found the parents and the daughter killed in their beds. The son, however, had survived just long enough to point the finger.
But by the time they looked for Mueller, he was gone. He didn't have a horse. He didn't have a carriage. He just walked toward the nearest rail line. That was his epiphany. The realization that the world was now connected by steel, and if he could master those rails, he could be anywhere.
For the next 3 years, the trail goes cold, but James argues that's just because we haven't found the records yet. Then, suddenly, families in the South start dying. Axe murders in Florida, in Louisiana. The press at the time called it the Axe Man of New Orleans or the Servant Girl Annihilator. But when you look at the proximity to the tracks, the profile shifts.
One of the most heartbreaking stops is in 1911, Colorado Springs, the Burnham family. This one is particularly gruesome because of the shrouding ritual. The killer didn't just cover the faces, he spent time arranging the bodies. It shows a level of psychopathy that goes beyond mere anger. It was a dark art for him.
Then we hit the axe murder summer of 19. It was a fever pitch. Villisca was just the climax. There were murders in Kansas and Illinois, all within weeks of each other. The rail lines were buzzing with the news, and yet no one thought to check the trains.
Why didn't they? It seems so obvious now.
Because in 1912, the railroad was the equivalent of the internet. It was too big to police. Thousands of men moved on those trains every day, hobos, drifters, workers. To search every boxcar for a thick-set German would have been impossible. He was a needle in a haystack of steel.
It's the hiding in plain sight aspect that really gets you. He wasn't a monster in a cave. He was the guy that brought you coffee for at the station. He was the guy who helped you load a crate of apples. And then at 2 a.m., he was the guy standing over your bed with your own axe.
As we move through the timeline tonight, we're going to look at the statistical probability of these crimes being unrelated. Bill James used a probability score for each crime, looking at the blunt axe, the window coverings, the train tracks. When you see the numbers, the coincidence disappears. It becomes a certainty.
We're also going to talk about the copycat theory. Was it possible people were just reading about these murders and mimicking them?
James argues no. Some of the details, like covering the mirrors or the specific way the windows were jammed, weren't always reported in the papers. They were inside details known only to the killer and the responding officers. Yet they show up in towns hundreds of miles apart long before the news could have traveled by mail.
And then in 1912, the murders in America just stop. The man from the train vanishes from the American record. Some thought he died. Some thought he was finally imprisoned for a minor crime. But Bill James has a different theory. He believes Mueller went home.
10 years later, in 1922, we see the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany. A remote farmstead, a family slaughtered. The killer lived in the attic for days, eating their food, tending the farm, all while the bodies lay in the barn. The signature is identical: the blunt force, the isolation, the ritualistic dwelling in the house of the dead.
It's a terrifying portrait of a man who was ahead of his time in the worst possible way. He understood the system better than the people who built it. He knew that the lack of communication between jurisdictions was his greatest ally.
If you look at the crime scene photos from Villisca, they are haunting. You see the towels pinned to the windows, you see the clothing draped over the mirrors. This wasn't a man in a rush. He was a man who felt at home in the presence of death.
And that brings us to the dwelling theory. In several of these cases, neighbors reported seeing smoke from the chimney or hearing sounds from the house after the family was supposedly dead. The man from the train would stay, he'd cook a meal, he'd sleep in the beds. He was a nomadic home invader.
Think about the psychological profile there. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted to possess their lives for a night. He wanted their house, their food, their safety. And once he had consumed it, he moved on to the next stop.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we have to ask, could it happen today? With DNA and CCTV? Probably not. But the man from the train didn't need a high tech world. He just needed a world where people didn't talk to each other. And in many ways, we're still living in that world.
The horror isn't just in the act, it's in the anonymity. Paul Mueller, or whoever he was, died a free man. He took his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a map of America marked with the blood of families who never saw him coming. He was the passenger that no one noticed, the traveler who left a trail of broken homes and shattered communities from Massachusetts to Germany, and in some cases, possibly even Nova Scotia, Canada.
He is the ultimate reminder that the greatest threats aren't always the ones we see coming. They aren't always the people we know. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the world is just a stranger sitting on a freight car, watching the lights of a small town flicker in the distance.
Tonight's deep dive into the archives shows us that data can be just as revealing as a fingerprint. By connecting these dots, we finally give a voice to the victims of Villisca, the Burnhams, the Newtons, and dozens of others who were forgotten by history. We may never have a confession, but we do have the pattern, and the pattern doesn't lie.
As we close out this episode, we want to leave you with a thought. The next time you hear a train passing by in the middle of the night, think of the people who lived along those tracks a century ago. Think of the silence that followed the whistle.
So, while I was researching this episode, I obviously found several different resources to watch and look into in order to learn as much as I could about Paul Mueller. And there were several different resources that I will link in the show description for everyone to go and look up for, because this is one of those intriguing, lesser known, and highly shocking stories. I feel that this is one that people may want to follow up on. So if there are any questions or concerns that you have as the audience, please go ahead and comment those below, and we'll try to get back to those on the next episode of Histories of Horror with you. But it looks like we're going to have a very fun next half of the season one. We have, like 18 more episodes before we're going to start our season two half. And to give a little bit of update, AL is still dealing with her husband overcoming surgery, and the GoFundMe that we talked about earlier in the year and in the season is still live and available if people want to go and donate to that, because any little bit helps. And that pretty much is all the updates and information I wanted to share with you guys as we get to this ending part of the show. So we're done with the tracks for now, and we're heading back to the fog, back to the stories that stay buried until someone is brave enough to dig them up. We'll be back next show with a new mystery, a new horror, and a new reason to keep your doors locked.
Until then, stay curious, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay safe. The world is a lot bigger and a lot darker than you think.
I'm Cy Marie Johnson.
And I'm Mayo Knuckles.
Until next time, this has been another edition of Histories of Horror.